Last month, I talked about Candace Owens and the alt-right's habit of constantly referring to Judeo-Christian values, generally as a way for bigoted Christians to cover up their own history of blatant anti-Semitism, while at the same time borrowing the victimhood of actual marginalized people, in this case the Jewish people, while at the same time furthering the marginalization of other groups, in this case usually Muslims. Well, wouldn't you know it, it's already popped up again in another prominent place, this time in an interview, or as the headline claims, a debate, it's really more of an interview, between Ben Shapiro and Sean Illing of Vox. It's really not much of a debate, but Illing does do a pretty good job of breaking down many of the ridiculous claims that Shapiro makes in his new book, The Right Side of History, from what I can tell is about how America isn't doing so great right now because we're no longer acknowledging our foundation of Judeo-Christian values. As a reminder, in case you missed my last video, the U.S. is not and has never been a Judeo-Christian nation. That phrase didn't even enter the popular lexicon until the mid-20th century. And even using the term that Shapiro actually means but can't say because it sounds as stupid and bigoted as it is, the U.S. also was not founded as a Christian nation with Christian beliefs or values. As Illing rightfully points out in this interview, Jefferson even edited his own Bible to get rid of all the supernatural shit. Christianity is not mentioned once in any of the founding documents for our country, and every attempt was made by the founding fathers to divorce religion from politics, since they saw how poorly that went down in other places like England. Obviously, everything Shapiro says in this interview and his book about Judeo-Christian values is a stupid lie. But I would like to draw particular attention to his very strange insistence that we should thank Judeo-Christianity, whatever that is, for science. Yes, all of science. Also, just a quick point of order, even though I do point out that Judeo-Christian is a stupid phrase and a stupid lie to use, I don't think that Ben Shapiro is stupid. Quite the opposite. I think he's pretty clever, which is why he tends to use the old Gish Gallop in this interview and in other places I've noticed. If you're not aware, the Gish Gallop is named after Duane Gish, a creationist, dead now, who also told a lot of stupid lies to a lot of credulous people, but who was himself a pretty intelligent person. He was famous for using debates to say so many wrong things so quickly that it would take his opponent hours to unravel and explain each one, rendering the debate absolutely useless. In a similar fashion, Ben Shapiro says things like the following in his debate with Illing. The belief that human beings are fundamentally equal, for example, comes from the Christian tradition. This is dropped right into Shapiro's reply to Illing, who is asking why he insists that America is founded on Judeo-Christian values. Illing can't even begin to address that because he wants to get back to Shapiro's false categorization of America's founding. Does the belief that human beings are fundamentally equal come from the tradition, the Christian tradition? We can't find that out in this interview because there's only so much they can cover. He's just dropped that in there. Note, though, that here Shapiro has dropped the Judeo from Christian. He says that this comes from the Christian tradition, probably because he has a slightly better leg to stand on, since New Testament Christians were some of the first to loudly and publicly insist that all humans are equal. Although the philosophy has deeper roots amongst the Stoics, for instance, and Muslims and Jews started preaching this same philosophy of equality at around the same time. It's not as simple as Shapiro makes it sound, but it's too complicated to stop the flow of discussion to discuss that when we're already dealing with Ben Shapiro's other lies about the founding of America. Illing can't make Shapiro admit he's just wrong about the founding of America, but he does then solidly smack him down when it comes to Shapiro pretending that the Nazis had nothing at all, no connection with Christianity. And then they get into science, at which point Shapiro insists that science in the West wouldn't exist without Christianity. I'm sorry, without Judeo-Christianity, which, again, is not a thing. And I assume he also has to say it, though, because so many of our greatest scientists were, in fact, Jewish. And he actually says this line: "There's nothing in evolutionary biology that suggests that objective truth is even a thing." Imagine someone just dropping that line on you in a live debate. I mean, I had to reread that sentence a good 15 times. I'm still rereading it to try to figure out what it could mean. It's so nonsensical that it's not even wrong. It's like saying there's nothing in astrophysics that suggests that Santa doesn't exist. Yes, but also no, and also what? Illing's response is really the only one that he could possibly give here. I'm not sure that's an accurate characterization of the scientific method, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. I actually did decide to go partway down that rabbit hole to just try to figure out what Shapiro is trying to say here. The best I can figure is that Shapiro is a presuppositionalist. That's a person who believes that no rational thought is possible without a basis in Christianity. Yes, this ignores the very long history of rational thought prior to the birth of Christ. Yes, it makes no sense, but there are a lot of people out there who believe it because they're desperately clinging to a religion that makes no sense in the broader context of scientific discovery, and they can't square that. Shapiro correctly says that scientists must make assumptions in order to explore our world. That's true. Scientists need to assume certain things about the universe in order to rationally study it. And Shapiro points out that one of these assumptions is the principle of sufficient reason, which is basically just cause and effect. Everything that exists does so because something happened before it. The mousetrap doesn't just magically fall at the end of the game Mousetrap. It falls because the boot kicked the ball that rolled down the ramp and into the basket. You get the idea. Cause and effect. Shapiro suggests that the principle of sufficient reason, or PSR, comes from our Judeo-Christian roots, which is so incredibly wrong. The PSR predates Socrates, first being used probably around 600 BC. It's an absolutely essential assumption because if you don't make the assumption that things naturally happen for some reason, then why bother to study the universe at all? How could the ancient Greeks figure out the circumference of the Earth back around 200 BC if they didn't accept the fact that the sun would cast a shadow on the summer solstice in two different cities at the same time? What if shadows just happen because God makes them happen? And what if a shadow today is going to be different from a shadow tomorrow just because God wills it? You can't do science under those circumstances. It's an absolutely bonkers argument for Shapiro to suggest that Judeo-Christians, who don't exist, are the ones who suddenly invented the scientific method and the entire basis of the scientific method. Even if the Judeo-Christians were a real thing, and if they did invent the scientific method themselves, their religion had nothing to do with it. The Bible does not in any way elevate or encourage scientific inquiry. It would be like giving Zeus credit for the Greeks' scientific discoveries. It just makes no sense. And Shapiro is exactly completely wrong in his understanding of the relationship between religion and science. Religion is at its heart an attempt to explain the natural world when we don't have the facts. Thunderstorms used to be God getting angry at us until we figured out what they actually are, and then God got a little smaller. We found out that he's not the cause of earthquakes, and he got a little smaller. He's not the cause of the plague or babies born with deformities, and he got smaller and smaller and smaller. Humanity's gods take the shape of whatever science has left to discover, which is why they're never going to go away. But that's also why science must constantly struggle against theocrats who are threatened by scientists explaining why their God is needed less and less and less. Illing did as good a job as one can in a discussion with someone like Shapiro, but for every point he was able to make Shapiro walk back, there were like 3 new little falsehoods that Shapiro was able to insert into the conversation. I'm not saying that it's pointless to debate people like Shapiro. I'm just saying that it's not an easy game to win, and I'm actually not even sure at this point that it's possible to win.